So it's been a week since I last updated you guys on my Irish chain quilt. And in that week, I did get my extra fabric in for the border. And I ordered a little extra because I thought it'd be fun to make matching pillow shams to go with this quilt set, because this will be on my son's bed after our house project. So I know last time I shot, I thought I would do just a very simple border, maybe 2 inches of the herringbone, which means I'd have to cut it in 2.5 inch strips. But I've been looking at different quilts and kind of looking at what I'm inspired by, and I did see this one pattern and I decided to copy off that. So I'm going to do a 1 inch border with the white first, and probably like a 3 inch border with the blue. So that'll give me 4 inches of border on an 82 inch quilt. So that brings the quilt out to 82 plus 8. That brings the quilt out to 90. My frame can take up to 96. I think will still be fine. So anyway, that's that. There's also a couple different ways you can do borders. So I just wanted to show you what you have to think about when you're deciding to do a border. There's actually probably countless different ways. But here's a quilt I made in 2025, and see how close I can get it. But I did not do a mitered corner. I made this piece longer here, and then I made this piece longer here, and then this piece longer here. So it's kind of like a stair-step approach to doing a border. But then I tried a new skill when I was doing some wall hanging quilts recently, where I did a mitered corner. So a little strip right there, bigger strip, and I actually made a mitered. So that's really classy. The way you do this is you actually sew the little piece to the big piece, and then there's some magical calculations you do, and then some tricks you do when you're sewing it together to make that miter. Now I decided for my Irish chain quilt, it's just a nice simple quilt. I'm gonna do that stair-step method. So I'm gonna have the short strip kind of overlapping on one side and then alternate it with a bigger strip overlapping on the other side. So that's that. The other things you could do is you could do blocks in the corner. So this is an Irish chain, so some people will put an extra Irish block in the corner and then the two pieces meet up to that corner. That's an option, but I decided to do that. It's very simpleton overlapping of the narrower strip, and then overlapping it on the other side by the big. So I don't know if you remember from my first video, but I actually soaked my flannel yardage for the quilt in concentrated starch solution, and that made cutting and sewing really great. It is now freezing outside. There's still 8 inches of snow from last weekend on the ground. So this time around I sprayed it with starch. So I made a very concentrated starch solution. My iron does not like this. Every time I put my iron on, it sticks. So I just ended up hanging it on my radiator to dry. And it feels pretty starchy, so it'll be interesting to see how this cuts and sews compared to my other flannel fabric that I'll be working with. Since this pattern did not call for a border, I need to be extra careful that I measure the quilt top completely so that I can add borders to it. So what I typically do is I'll fold my quilt top into quadrants, and I will measure the width and the length of a quadrant and multiply it by 2. And then this will give me the total width and total length of my quilt. It's also important to measure in a few different locations, because if your quilt's not square, you could have some variance depending on the part of the quilt you're measuring. Fortunately for this quilt, it was very square, so not a lot of variance. Felt very confident in my numbers. This was new fabric. I had to kind of repress it and get it into shapes that I could use my stripology ruler to cut the strips. I was pretty pleased with how well it starched up just from using spray starch and letting it dry. For the 1 inch white border, I cut 1.5 inch strips. And for the 3 inch blue border, I cut 3.5 inch strips. As the bulk of this quilt top starts to really put pressure on the sewing machine, I felt it was very important to pin everything at this place, and often I just sewed right over the pins to ensure that I didn't have any slipping of my border and my quilt top. I also used my ironing board to help support the quilt so that I didn't have as much of that weight pulling against me. It's always fun to do that initial pressing and to see that border come together. I was very pleased that I decided to make this border. I feel like it really adds that vintage flair to this quilt top. And a custom we have in my house is Cameron has to test out the quilt.